The wagon wheels groaned against the parched earth as Emma Hartley clutched her worn carpet bag. Squinting through the relentless Wyoming sun, red dust swirled around the Morrison Ranch gates, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that seemed to seep into her very bones. She had traveled 3 days from the orphanage in Cheyenne, her meager savings barely covering the fare, all for this moment standing before the grandest ranch she'd ever seen. The main house loomed before her, a 2-story timber structure with wide verandas that promised shade from the merciless heat. Ranch hands moved about their duties, casting curious glances at the young woman in her threadbare dress. Emma straightened her spine, smoothed her dark hair beneath her bonnet, and walked up the steps with what dignity she could muster. "Mrs." Whitmore answered the door, a stern woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her sharp eyes swept over Emma from head to toe, taking in the patched dress, the scuffed boots, the determined set of her jaw. "You're the girl from the orphanage, Mrs." Whitmore stated rather than asked. "Applying for the housemaid position." "Yes, ma'am. Emma Hartley." "How old are you, girl?" 19, ma'am." "Mrs." Whitmore's lips pursed. "Young, too young. Perhaps, Mr. Morrison left strict instructions he needs someone reliable, not some flighty thing who'll run off at the first sign of hard work." Emma met her gaze steadily. "I've worked since I was 7 years old. Ma'am, the sisters at St. Catherine's can vouch for my character. I know laundry, cooking, mending, and I'm not afraid of long hours." "Can you read?" "Yes, ma'am, and write," the sisters insisted. After what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Whitmore stepped aside. "Trial period, 1 month. You'll sleep in the servants' quarters behind the kitchen. $6 a month, room and board included. Any theft, laziness, or improper behavior, and you're out without pay. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Emma's first days at the Morrison Ranch tested every ounce of her resolve. She rose before dawn to stoke the kitchen fires, her hands quickly blistering from the rough work. The copper boiler for laundry seemed to hold an endless supply of sheets, shirts, and tablecloths. She scrubbed until her knuckles bled, wrung out heavy fabric until her arms ached, and hung everything on lines that stretched across the yard like white flags of surrender. The house itself felt cavernous and cold despite the summer heat. Mr. Morrison had been away on cattle business for months, leaving only the skeleton crew of household staff. Emma learned from the cook, Mrs. Chen, that the mistress had died 2 years prior from fever, leaving behind a grief that seemed to permeate the very walls. "Poor little mite," Mrs. Chen whispered one evening as they prepared supper. "Miss Sarah ain't been the same since her mama passed. Barely speaks. That one." Emma had glimpsed the child only in passing, a small figure in white pinafores who haunted the upper floors like a tiny ghost. Sarah Morrison, 6 years old and motherless, with her father's dark hair and what must have been her mother's delicate features. It was during Emma's second week that she properly met Sarah. Emma was dusting the library when she heard soft crying from behind the heavy curtains. Pulling them back, she found the little girl curled in the window seat, a picture book clutched to her chest. "Miss Sarah," Emma kept her voice gentle. "Are you hurt?" The child looked up with tear-filled eyes. "I can't read the words. Mama used to read them." Emma's heart clenched. She glanced toward the door. Mrs. Whitmore had been very clear about maintaining proper boundaries with the family, but the child's loneliness called to something deep within her own orphaned soul. "Would you like me to read to you just for a little while?" Sarah nodded. Scooting over to make room, Emma settled beside her, taking the book, a collection of fairy tales with beautiful illustrations, as she read about princes and castles and happily ever after. She felt Sarah gradually relax against her side. From that day forward, their secret meetings became routine. Whenever Emma could steal a moment from her duties, she would find Sarah in various hiding spots throughout the house. She taught the girl simple words, helped her practice her letters, and told her stories from her own imagination when the books ran out. "Tell me about the orphanage," Sarah requested one rainy afternoon. Emma considered her words carefully. "It was different from here. Many children, all together. We shared everything: beds, clothes, toys. But we looked after each other, like a big family." "Did you have a mama before?" "I did, but she went to heaven when I was very small, younger than you." Sarah's small hand slipped into hers. "Like my mama?" "Yes, sweetheart, like your mama." The kitchen became another refuge. Emma discovered that Sarah loved watching her bake, mesmerized by the transformation of flour and eggs into bread and cakes. She would perch on a stool, flour dusting her nose, as Emma taught her to measure and stir. "Can we make Mama's honey cakes?" Sarah asked one day. Emma found the recipe in Mrs. Morrison's handwritten cookbook, the pages stained with use. Together they mixed the batter, Sarah's tongue poking out in concentration as she cracked eggs. When the cakes emerged golden from the oven, Sarah's smile was brighter than Emma had ever seen it. One evening, as Emma tucked Sarah into bed, another forbidden act that had somehow become routine, the child grabbed her hand. "Emma, will you leave like Mama did?" The question pierced Emma's heart. She knelt beside the bed, choosing her words with care. "I'm not going anywhere, sweet girl. I'll stay right here as long as you need me." "Promise." "I promise." But promises, Emma knew, were fragile things in the harsh reality of the frontier. When she ventured into town for supplies, the whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. The good citizens of Willow Creek knew exactly what she was: an orphan, a servant, a nobody trying to rise above her station. "That's the Morrisons' new maid," she heard Mrs. Blackwood murmur to her companion outside the general store. "Orphan girl. You know what they say about girls with no family, no morals, no breeding." Emma kept her head high, purchased her goods, and returned to the ranch. But the words stung, reminding her that no matter how much Sarah needed her, no matter how empty the big house felt, she would always be just the hired help. Late at night, exhausted from the day's labors, Emma would lie in her narrow cot and think about the strange turn her life had taken. She had come seeking simply employment, a roof over her head, honest work for honest pay. Instead, she had found a lonely child who needed her, a house full of shadows and memories, and a place that was beginning to feel dangerously close to home. She thought of Mr. Morrison, still absent, still unknown except through the portraits in the hallway and the child who bore his features. What kind of man left his daughter for months on end? What would he think of the maid who had dared to comfort his child, to fill even a small part of the void left by her mother's death? The summer stretched on, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. Sarah began to smile more often, to venture out of her room, to join Emma in the garden where they tended a small patch of wildflowers. The other servants noticed the change, and while Mrs. Whitmore maintained her stern demeanor, she stopped chastising Emma for spending time with the child. "She needs a woman's care," Mrs. Chen observed one evening. "And you're good for her, whatever that old Biddy Whitmore says." As autumn approached and the leaves began their slow turn toward gold, Emma felt the rhythm of the ranch settling into her bones. She knew the creak of each floorboard, the particular way the morning light slanted through the kitchen windows, the sound of Sarah's laughter echoing through the empty halls. She had not expected this to find purpose in this remote corner of Wyoming, to discover that sometimes family was not about blood, but about the promises whispered in the dark, the flour-dusted hands learning to bake, the stories shared in stolen moments. But Mr. Morrison would return eventually, and when he did, Emma knew that everything might change. The thought filled her with a dread she couldn't quite name, a fear that the fragile peace they had built might shatter like the first frost under the weight of propriety and expectations. For now, though, she had Sarah's hand in hers, honeycakes cooling on the windowsill, and the vast Wyoming sky stretching endlessly above them. For now, that was enough. The autumn wind carried a sharp bite as James Morrison guided his horse through the familiar gates of his ranch. 6 months. He'd been gone 6 months, driving cattle to Kansas, negotiating contracts, anything to avoid the emptiness that awaited him in that house. But Sarah needed him, and he'd stayed away long enough. Dust-covered and weary, he handed his mount to the stable boy and climbed the porch steps. The house seemed quieter than he remembered, though perhaps that was just the weight of memory playing tricks. He pushed open the heavy oak door, expecting the usual formal greeting from Mrs. Whitmore. Instead, he heard something that stopped him: cold laughter. Sarah's laughter, bright and genuine, floating from the parlor. When had he last heard that sound? James moved silently down the hall, drawn by his daughter's voice. "And then the brave princess rescued the knight from the dragon." "That's right," came an unfamiliar female voice, warm with amusement. "Because in our stories, the princesses can be just as brave as anyone else." He reached the parlor doorway and froze. There, on the settee by the dying fire, sat a young woman in a simple gray dress. Sarah was curled against her side, head resting on the woman's shoulder, eyes heavy with approaching sleep. The woman, she couldn't be more than 20, was stroking Sarah's dark hair with gentle fingers, humming a soft lullaby. The sight hit him like a physical blow. Margaret used to sit just so, in that very spot, with Sarah tucked close. For a moment, the pain was so acute he couldn't breathe. Then the woman looked up, and her humming ceased. Her eyes, startlingly blue in the firelight, widened with alarm. She started to rise, disturbing Sarah, who made a small sound of protest. "Shh, sweetheart," the woman whispered. "Your father's home." "Papa?" Sarah's eyes fluttered open, then filled with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "Papa?" She launched herself at him, and James caught her automatically, lifting her into his arms. But his eyes remained on the woman, who now stood with her hands clasped, looking like she wanted nothing more than to flee. "Who are you?" His voice came out harsher than intended. "Emma Hartley, sir, the housemaid. I apologize, Miss Sarah couldn't sleep, and She tells me stories, Papa," Sarah interrupted, her small arms tight around his neck, "and teaches me letters, and we make Mama's honeycakes." James felt something twist in his chest. He set Sarah down gently. "Go to your room, sweetheart. I'll be up to say goodnight soon." "But Papa..." "Go on now." Sarah's lower lip trembled, but she obeyed, casting a worried glance at Emma as she left. Once her footsteps faded, James turned his full attention to the young woman. "My study now." Emma followed him down the hall, her footsteps barely audible. In his study, surrounded by ledgers and the smell of leather and tobacco, James poured himself a whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. He didn't offer her a seat. "Explain yourself. Miss Hartley. I left clear instructions that Sarah was to be cared for by Mrs. Whitmore." Emma lifted her chin. "Mrs. Whitmore does her best, sir, but she has many duties. I noticed Miss Sarah was lonely, spending hours alone. I only meant to read to her occasionally, but you overstepped significantly." He took a long swallow of whiskey. "How long has this been going on?" 3 months, sir, since shortly after I arrived." 3 months. He set down his glass harder than necessary. 3 months of you insinuating yourself into my daughter's affections. Tell me, Miss Hartley, what exactly are your intentions?" Color flooded her cheeks. "My intentions, sir? I care for your daughter, nothing more. You're a housemaid, an orphan. From what Mrs. Whitmore tells me, no family, no connections. And here I find you playing mother to my child." Emma's hands clenched in her skirts, but her voice remained steady. I am those things, yes, but I'm also someone who couldn't stand to see a child grieving alone. You were gone. Mr. Morrison, someone had to be there. The accusation in her tone sparked his temper. How dare you? How dare I love her? Emma's composure cracked. Yes, I'm just a maid. Yes, I'm an orphan. But I know what it's like to lose a mother, to feel alone in the world. I couldn't walk past her tears and do nothing. That wasn't your place. Then whose was it? She took a shaking breath. I'm not trying to be her mother, Mr. Morrison. I'm just trying to be someone who cares, someone who stays. The last word hung between them like an indictment. James turned to the window. Seeing his own reflection in the dark glass, a man who'd run from his grief straight into the wilderness, leaving his daughter behind. You'll maintain appropriate boundaries from now on, he said finally. No more stories. No more. Whatever this was I witnessed tonight, you're the housemaid. Nothing more. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir. He heard her leave, the soft click of the door, and drained his whiskey in one burning swallow. Through the ceiling, he could hear Sarah crying. The days that followed were torture. Sarah, who had run to greet him that first night, now regarded him with wounded eyes. She picked at her food, answered in monosyllables, and spent hours staring out windows. The house, which had felt empty before, now felt like a tomb. Emma, true to her word, maintained perfect propriety. She cleaned. She served. She kept her eyes downcast and her interactions with Sarah limited to the barest necessity. But James saw the way his daughter's eyes followed the maid, saw the way Emma's hands trembled when she served dinner, saw the effort it took them both to stay apart. She won't eat. Mrs. Whitmore reported after a week. Barely touched her breakfast, refused lunch entirely. James found Sarah in her mother's old sewing room, curled in a chair with one of Margaret's shawls. Sweetheart, you need to eat. I'm not hungry. Sarah, why did you send Emma away? The words burst out of her. She didn't leave like Mama. She stayed. She promised she'd stay, and you made her go away. She hasn't gone anywhere. She's still here, doing her job. It's not the same. Sarah's face crumpled. She won't read to me or braid my hair or teach me words. She won't even smile at me. You made her not love me anymore. The accusation cut deep. James knelt beside the chair. That's not true, sweetheart. Sometimes there are rules about how people should behave. Stupid rules. Sarah buried her face in the shawl. I hate the rules. I hate you. That night, unable to sleep, James wandered the house. He found himself in the kitchen, where the lingering smell of bread reminded him of happier times. On the counter sat a plate of honey cakes, perfectly golden, untouched. She makes them every day. He startled. Emma stood in the doorway, a candle in her hand. I couldn't sleep, she said unnecessarily. I hoped she might eat them if they were there. She hasn't, though. James stared at the cakes. Margaret's recipe. Yes, Sarah showed me the cookbook. Emma set down the candle. I'm sorry, I know you said boundaries, but she says I made you stop loving her. Emma's breath caught. Oh, Mr. Morrison, that's not, I could never. She pressed a hand to her mouth. May I speak freely? He nodded, not trusting his voice. I understand propriety. I understand my place. But that little girl has already lost one mother. Now she thinks she's lost the only person who's shown her affection since. I can follow your rules, sir. I can be the perfect, invisible servant. But please don't ask me to be cruel to her. Please don't ask me to pretend I don't care. James sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what to do. When I saw you with her, it was like seeing Margaret's ghost. It hurt, and I reacted badly. Emma moved closer, cautious as a deer. She needs you, Mr. Morrison. Not me. Not really. She needs her father. I don't know how to be what she needs. Margaret was the one who knew about stories and braiding hair, and I'm good with cattle and contracts, not with little girls who look at me with their mother's eyes. Then learn. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. She won't wait forever. Children don't. They grow. They change. They find their comfort where they can. Don't let pride or grief or propriety rob you both of these years. James looked up at her then. Really looked. Not the uniform, not the station, but the woman herself, young. Yes, but with an old soul in those blue eyes. Someone who'd known loss and loneliness and had chosen compassion anyway. The stories, he said roughly. The bedtime stories. You could continue those, if you wanted. Hope flickered across her face. Truly. And the lessons, the baking, whatever makes her happy. Emma smiled then, a sunrise of a smile. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, thank you. As she turned to go, candle casting dancing shadows, James found himself calling after her. Miss Hartley, Emma. She paused. Thank you for being here when I wasn't, for staying. Her smile softened. Someone had to. After she left, James sat in the dark kitchen, eating one of his wife's honey cakes, and thought about ghosts and grief and the unexpected ways that healing sometimes arrived. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, winter approaching fast, but inside, for the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel quite so cold. The drought came like a thief in the night, stealing moisture from the earth until the ranch lands cracked like broken pottery. By late October, the situation had grown desperate. The main well's water level dropped daily, and the cattle grew gaunt, their mournful lowing a constant reminder of nature's cruelty. James stood at the porch rail, watching dust devils dance across what used to be grassland. 3 weeks without rain. The smaller streams had vanished, leaving only dried beds lined with brittle stones. Mr. Morrison. He turned to find Emma, her face drawn with worry. The well's nearly dry, Mrs. Chen says we have maybe 2 days' water left, if we're careful. James rubbed his jaw, feeling the weight of responsibility. 50 head of cattle, 8 horses, and a household to maintain. We'll have to start hauling water from the river. It's 15 miles, but... Wait. Emma bit her lip, a gesture he'd noticed she made when thinking. There's something when I walk with Sarah sometimes, out past the eastern boundary, near those old cottonwoods. I've seen deer tracks leading into a ravine. Deer always know where water is. He studied her face. How far? Maybe 3 miles. The terrain's rough, though rocky. Show me. Emma blinked. Sir? Get your riding clothes. We'll go now, while there's still daylight. 20 minutes later. Emma emerged from the house in a borrowed split skirt and sturdy boots, looking uncomfortable but determined. James tried not to notice how the riding clothes revealed her figure, how the afternoon sun caught the copper threads in her dark hair. Can you ride? He asked, leading 2 horses from the stable. A little. The orphanage had an old plow horse. We took turns. He helped her mount the gentle mare, his hands spanning her waist briefly, and felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Foolishness. He was a widower with responsibilities, not some green boy. They rode east, Emma pointing the way. She sat the horse better than expected, moving with natural grace despite her obvious inexperience. The land grew rougher, forcing them to pick their way carefully through sandstone formations and sparse juniper. There, Emma pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods, their leaves already turned gold. The tracks led that way. They dismounted, and James followed her into a narrow ravine. The walls rose steep on either side, and the air grew noticeably cooler. Then he heard the precious sound of trickling water. Lord have mercy, he breathed. Hidden beneath an overhang of rock, a natural spring bubbled up from the earth, feeding a small pool before disappearing again into the stone. The water ran clear and cold, sweeter than wine to his parched throat. "You found it," he said, wonder in his voice. "Emma, you may have just saved the ranch." She smiled, that sunrise smile that transformed her plain features into something almost beautiful. "The deer found it. I just followed." They worked together to clear debris from the pool and mark the trail. By the time they finished, the sun hung low, painting the canyon walls crimson and gold. "We should start back," James said reluctantly. In the fading light, the temperature would drop quickly. But as they reached the horses, his mare shied sideways, eyes rolling white. James heard it, then the distinctive rattle that meant death in the desert. The snake lay coiled between them and the horses, thick as his arm and ready to strike. "Don't move," he whispered. Emma stood frozen, barely breathing. The snake's head swayed, tasting the air. James calculated the distance, the angle. His gun was on the saddle. Useless. One strike to the leg out here. Miles from help. Slowly, carefully, he bent and picked up a rock. The movement agitated the snake further, its rattle crescendoing. He'd have one chance. The rock flew true, striking the snake's head. It writhed once and lay still. Emma sagged against him, trembling, and without thinking, he pulled her close. "It's all right, you're safe." She pressed her face to his chest, and he became acutely aware of her, the warmth of her body, the soft catch of her breath, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this two people holding each other as shadows lengthened around them. Then propriety reasserted itself, and they stepped apart. Emma's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "Thank you," she whispered. "We should go." But as they mounted up, he realized they'd stayed too long. Full dark was maybe 20 minutes away, and the ravine would be treacherous for the horses. "There's a line shack about a mile north," he said. "We'll have to shelter there tonight." Emma nodded, trusting his judgment. They rode in silence, the tension between them as palpable as the cooling air. The shack appeared just as the last light faded, a rough structure of logs and mud, used by cowboys during roundup. Inside, James lit the lantern kept for emergencies while Emma explored their shelter. One room, sparse furnishings, a narrow cot, a table, 2 chairs, and a small stove with a supply of wood. "I'll sleep outside," James said immediately. "Don't be ridiculous. It's freezing." Emma busied herself starting a fire in the stove. "We're both adults. We can manage one night of discomfort." He wanted to argue, but knew she was right. The temperature was dropping fast, and clouds had rolled in, promising the rain they desperately needed but making the night bitter cold. They shared the meager supplies from his saddlebag's jerky, hardtack, and water from the precious spring. As they ate, the awkwardness gradually eased. "Tell me about your wife," Emma said suddenly. "Sarah mentions her, but carefully, like she's afraid of causing pain." James stared into his cup. Margaret was sunshine. That's the only way to describe her. She lit up every room, made everyone feel special. When the fever took her, he shook his head. "I didn't handle it well." "You ran." The blunt words should have angered him, but her tone held only understanding. "I ran," he agreed. "Threw myself into work, into anything that kept me moving. Left Sarah with servants and memories. Grief makes us do strange things." Emma's voice carried the weight of experience. "When my mother died, I used to pretend she was just traveling, that she'd come back for me someday. It took years to accept the truth." "How old were you?" 4, old enough to remember her face, her voice singing lullabies, young enough that the memories feel more like dreams. They talked through the evening as rain finally began to fall, pattering on the roof. James found himself sharing things he'd never spoken aloud, his fear of failing Sarah, his guilt over Margaret's death, irrational but persistent, his struggle to connect with a daughter who looked so much like her mother It hurt. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally offering her own experiences. She spoke of the orphanage, of kind Sister Catherine who taught her to read, of the loneliness that never quite left even in a building full of children. Is that why you connected with Sarah, the loneliness? Partly. Emma pulled the rough blanket tighter around her shoulders. But also because she has such capacity for love. Even in her grief, she reached out. How could I not reach back? The fire burned low. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming steadily. They should sleep, dawn would come early, but neither moved. I've been a fool, James said quietly. Pushing you away, creating distance. Sarah needs you. She needs her father more. Perhaps she needs both. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Emma's eyes met his across the small space, and something shifted, subtle but profound. Not quite attraction, not yet, but recognition. Of what? He couldn't say. Finally, exhaustion won. James insisted Emma take the cot while he fashioned a pallet from horse blankets near the stove. As she settled in, her voice came soft through the darkness. James, the water we found today, it changes everything, doesn't it? Yes, he said, understanding she meant more than just the ranch's survival. Everything. The storm raged through the night, but inside the little shack, two lonely souls had found something unexpected, the beginning of understanding, perhaps even the first tentative steps toward healing. When morning came, bringing clear skies and the promise of renewed life to the drought-stricken land, they would return to their proper roles, master and servant, employer and employee. But for tonight, they were just James and Emma, two people who had faced danger together, shared their sorrows, and discovered that sometimes the most precious things, like hidden springs in the desert, were found when you weren't even looking. The rain continued to fall, washing the dust from the earth, filling the streams, bringing hope. And in a rough line shack on the Wyoming frontier, two hearts began the slow, careful work of learning to trust again. The carriage bearing Victoria Ashford arrived on a crisp November morning, black, lacquered, and gleaming like a beetle in the sun. James watched from the porch as footmen scrambled to assist their passenger, a vision in emerald silk and pristine white gloves. Victoria descended with practiced grace, her pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls beneath a hat that probably cost more than his ranch hands made in a month. She was beautiful in the way of China dolls, perfect, cold, and fragile seeming, though James suspected the fragility was carefully cultivated illusion. James! She extended a gloved hand, which he bent to kiss perfunctorily. Father sends his regards. He's quite interested in your cattle expansion plans. Judge Ashford's interest meant potential investment, which the ranch needed. James forced a welcoming smile. Victoria, this is an unexpected pleasure. Is it? Her laugh tinkled like crystal. When I heard you'd returned from your travels, I simply had to see how you were faring. A widower, managing alone with a young daughter, it must be terribly difficult. Behind him, the door opened. Emma emerged with the tea tray, moving with her usual quiet efficiency. Victoria's sharp green eyes tracked her movement, taking in every detail from the simple gray dress to the carefully pinned dark hair. Your housemaid, I presume. Miss Hartley, yes. Emma set down the tray and curtsied properly. Ma'am. Victoria's gaze lingered, dismissive. Rather young for such a position, and pretty, in a common sort of way. Heat flashed through James at the casual insult, but Emma's expression remained serene as she poured tea with steady hands. Will there be anything else? Mr. Morrison. No, thank you. Miss Hartley. She withdrew, but not before Victoria added, Do make sure the silver is properly polished. Girl, I noticed spots on the sugar bowl. There were no spots. James had watched Emma polish that very bowl this morning until it reflected like a mirror. But he held his tongue, remembering the judge's money, the ranch's needs. Victoria stayed through lunch, monopolizing conversation with gossip from Denver society and transparent hints about the suitability of their match. She was everything a man in his position should want: wealthy, refined, connected. So why did he find himself watching the door, hoping for glimpses of dark hair and blue eyes? After lunch, Victoria requested a tour of the house. In the nursery, they found Sarah with Emma, working on letters at the small desk. "Sarah," James said, "come greet our guest. This is Miss Ashford." Sarah approached reluctantly, dropping a perfect curtsy that Emma had clearly taught her. "How do you do, Miss Ashford?" Victoria barely glanced at the child. "Charming, though she could use some refinement. Her posture is atrocious. And that dress, really. James, you must get her proper clothes. She looks like a farmer's daughter." Sarah's face crumpled slightly. Emma stepped forward instinctively, then caught herself, hands clenching in her apron. "I like my dress," Sarah said quietly. "Emma helped me pick the fabric." "Emma," Victoria's voice sharpened. "How familiar. Do you always allow the help such liberties with your daughter?" "James." "Miss Hartley has been instrumental in Sarah's education," James said carefully. "Has she? How unusual." Victoria circled Emma like a hawk evaluating prey. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, where did you receive your education? What qualifies you to teach a gentleman's daughter?" "I was educated at St. Catherine's Orphanage. Ma'am, the sisters were thorough in their instruction." "An orphanage?" Victoria's smile could have curdled milk. "How charitable of James to employ you. Though I do wonder if someone with proper breeding might be more appropriate for Sarah's care." "Miss Hartley suits us perfectly," James said, more sharply than intended. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Does she indeed?" The dining room that evening was a battlefield disguised as a social occasion. Victoria, resplendent in burgundy silk, had insisted on staying for dinner. She commanded the head of the table opposite James, relegating Sarah to the side like an afterthought. "This soup," Victoria pronounced after one spoonful, "lacks sophistication, too much salt, not enough refinement. You really must find better help. James." Emma, serving the next course, never flinched, though James saw the tight line of her jaw. The soup was perfect. He'd had 2 bowls at lunch. "In Denver," Victoria continued, "we have French chefs. Perhaps I could send one to train your cook as a wedding gift." "Of course." Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. "Wedding?" "Nothing's been decided," James said quickly. "Oh, but it's inevitable, isn't it?" Victoria laughed. "A man in your position needs a wife. Someone who understands society, who can guide Sarah properly, manage your household with appropriate standards." "I don't want a new mother," Sarah said, chin trembling. Victoria's patience finally snapped. "Want, my dear child? What you want is hardly relevant. You need guidance, discipline, education in proper behavior. Look at you eating with your elbows on the table, interrupting adult conversation. It's clear you've been allowed to run wild far too long." "That's enough." Emma stepped forward, setting down the serving dish with a decisive click. "Miss Sarah is a delightful, well-mannered child who's been through a difficult loss. She doesn't need criticism. She needs understanding." The room went silent. Victoria's face flushed ugly red. "How dare you forget your place, girl?" "My place," Emma said steadily, "is wherever Miss Sarah needs me to be. And right now, she needs someone to defend her against unwarranted cruelty." "Cruelty?" Victoria stood, silk rustling. "James, are you going to allow this nobody to speak to me this way?" James looked between them. Victoria, beautiful and furious, everything society said he should want, and Emma, fierce as a mother wolf defending her cub, everything his heart whispered he needed. "Miss Hartley is right," he said quietly. "You've been unkind to my daughter. I think you should leave." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "You're dismissing me for a servant." "I'm asking you to leave because you've insulted my child and my household." "Your household?" Her laugh was bitter. "Oh, I see it now. The looks, the defense. She's warming your bed. Isn't she the little orphan maid, playing at being mistress of the house?" "Get out!" James's voice was deadly quiet. "Now!" Victoria swept toward the door, pausing for one last volley. "You'll regret this, James Morrison, when the whole county knows you've chosen a penniless nobody over a judge's daughter. When your reputation is ruined and your business connections dry up, you'll beg me to take you back." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the aftermath, Sarah threw herself into Emma's arms, sobbing, "I don't want her to be my mother. I don't want anyone but you." Emma held her close, murmuring comfort, but her eyes met James's over the child's head. They were full of worry, understanding the threat Victoria represented. "I should go," Emma said later, after Sarah had been soothed and tucked into bed. They stood in the hallway, shadows dancing in the lamplight. "She's right about one thing: my presence here will cause talk." "Let them talk." "You don't understand. She'll make sure everyone knows." "Knows what?" James stepped closer. "That you care for my daughter, that you've brought light back into this house, that you're worth a dozen Victoria Ashfords." Emma's breath caught. "James!" "Stay." The word came out rougher than intended. "Please, Sarah needs you. We need you." The pronoun hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibility. Emma searched his face, and something in her expression softened. "All right, for Sarah." "For Sarah," he agreed, though they both knew it was becoming more than that. Outside, carriage wheels crunched on gravel as Victoria departed. But inside the Morrison house, a different future was taking shape, one built not on society's expectations, but on quiet courage, fierce loyalty, and the growing recognition that sometimes the most precious things came in unexpected packages. The battle lines were drawn. Victoria would not forget this slight, and James knew the coming weeks would bring challenges. But looking at Emma, seeing the strength in her slim shoulders and the devotion in her eyes, he found he didn't care. Some things were worth fighting for. The whispers started like prairie fire, spreading from the mercantile to the church steps to the quilting circles. Victoria Ashford had been thorough in her campaign, and within a week, Emma couldn't enter town without feeling the weight of judging eyes. "That's her," she heard Mrs. Blackwood hissed to her companion outside the general store. "The orphan girl who's bewitched James Morrison has him wrapped around her little finger, and the poor child too." Emma kept her head high, purchasing the necessary supplies with quiet dignity. But when the clerk shortchanged her deliberately, she was certain she bit her tongue rather than cause a scene that would only fuel more gossip. The situation worsened when Judge Ashford himself paid a visit to the ranch, a stern man with Victoria's cold eyes. He cornered James in his study while Emma tried to distract Sarah in the kitchen. "You've insulted my daughter." The judge's voice carried through the walls. "Publicly humiliated her for a servant girl. I'm withdrawing my investment offer, and I'll make sure every other potential investor knows exactly why." Emma's hands trembled as she helped Sarah roll out cookie dough. This was her fault. The ranch needed that money, needed those connections. "Why is everyone so angry?" Sarah asked, her small face pinched with worry. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make things complicated that should be simple." But it wasn't simple. By December, the social isolation was complete. Invitations stopped arriving. When James took Sarah to town for the Christmas pageant rehearsal, several mothers pulled their children away, whispering about inappropriate influences. James found Emma in the barn that evening, brushing down the horses with fierce strokes. "I'm sending Sarah to school in Denver after Christmas," he said without preamble. "My sister Catherine has agreed to take her." The brush stilled in Emma's hand. "I see. It's for the best," She needs proper education, exposure to society. You mean she needs to be away from me? Emma turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Away from the scandal I've brought to your house. That's not... James ran a hand through his hair. The rumors are getting worse. Someone claimed they saw you entering my bedroom at night. Another said you've been stealing Margaret's jewelry. It's poisoning everything. Then I should leave, not Sarah. No, the word came out harsh, desperate. We can't lose you. But Sarah deserves better than to be ostracized because of choices I've made. Choices, Emma's voice cracked. Is that what I am, a choice you regret? He crossed to her in 2 strides, catching her shoulders. The only thing I regret is not being able to protect you from their viciousness. Not being able to... He stopped, jaw clenched. Not being able to what? His hands gentled on her shoulders, thumbs tracing small circles. Not being able to declare to the whole world what you mean to us. To me. Emma's breath caught. They stood frozen, the moment crystallizing around them. Then the dinner bell rang, shattering the spell, and they stepped apart. But Sarah had overheard enough. That night, as Emma tucked her in, the little girl clung to her desperately. Papa wants to send me away because of the mean people, doesn't he? Emma smoothed her hair. He wants what's best for you. You're what's best for me. Sarah's jaw set in a stubborn line that was pure Morrison. I won't go. I'll run away if he makes me. You'll do no such thing. But Emma's heart ached at the fierce loyalty. Your papa loves you. Everything he does is because of that love. Then why does love hurt so much? Emma had no answer for that. The breaking point came 3 nights later. A blizzard had rolled in, blanketing the ranch in white. Emma was checking on Sarah. The child had been restless, upset about the looming separation when she heard the front door bang open. Sarah's bed was empty, window cracked open, small footprints already being erased by the wind. James! Emma's scream brought him running. Sarah's gone. His face went white. How long? I don't know. 10 minutes, 20. Oh God, in this storm. They didn't waste time on recriminations. Within minutes, ranch hands were roused, search parties organized. Emma refused to stay behind, bundling into whatever warm clothes she could find. You don't know the terrain, James protested. I know Sarah. I know where she might go. They rode out into the howling white, calling Sarah's name until their throats were raw. The temperature was dropping fast, too fast. A child in this weather. The old oak, Emma suddenly remembered. By the creek where we have picnics. She said once it would be a good place to hide. James didn't question, just turned his horse to follow hers. The ride seemed endless. Snow stinging their faces, visibility near zero. Emma prayed harder than she'd ever prayed, bargaining with God, promising anything if Sarah was safe. They almost missed her. A small dark bundle at the base of the tree, curled into herself, terrifyingly still. Sarah! James leaped from his horse, gathering his daughter into his arms. Her lips were blue, skin like ice, but her eyelids fluttered. Papa, I'm cold. I know, sweetheart, we're going home. Emma stripped off her coat, wrapping it around the child. James mounted with Sarah cradled against him, and Emma led his horse while he focused on keeping his daughter warm. The ride back was a nightmare of cold and fear, but finally, blessed warmth and light appeared ahead. Dr. Brennan arrived within the hour, grim-faced as he examined the child. Exposure, early stages of hypothermia. She's lucky you found her when you did. A few more minutes. He didn't need to finish. Emma collapsed in a chair, shaking with delayed reaction. James paced like a caged animal until the doctor finally pronounced Sarah stable. She needs constant warmth, monitoring through the night. Any sign of fever, send for me immediately. Emma stationed herself at Sarah's bedside, Refusing to leave, James joined her, and together they kept vigil, applying warm compresses, coaxing sips of heated broth between blue lips, murmuring prayers and promises. Toward dawn, Sarah's color improved. Her breathing deepened into natural sleep rather than the terrifying stillness of before. James reached across the bed, grasping Emma's hand. If we'd lost her... We didn't. Emma squeezed back. She's strong, like her father. She ran because of me, because I was going to separate you. You were trying to protect her. I was being a coward. His voice was raw with exhaustion and self-recrimination. So afraid of what people would say that I was willing to tear apart the only real family she's known since Margaret died. Emma lifted their joined hands, pressing her lips to his knuckles. We all make mistakes when we're afraid. Sarah stirred, eyes opening. Mama, she mumbled, still half asleep. Then, more clearly, Emma. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. Don't leave. Papa, don't make her leave. James leaned over, kissing his daughter's forehead. No one's leaving, I promise. We're a family, and families stay together. Sarah smiled and drifted back to sleep, one small hand clutching Emma's, the other holding her father's. Outside, the blizzard had blown itself out, leaving the world clean and white and new. In the days that followed, as Sarah recovered and Christmas approached, something fundamental had shifted. James no longer spoke of sending her away. When townspeople whispered, he met their eyes directly, daring them to speak their poison aloud. And Emma allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, love could indeed triumph over society's expectations. The price might be high isolation, judgment, closed doors, but looking at the child who called her mama in unguarded moments, at the man whose eyes followed her with increasing warmth, she knew it was a price worth paying. The gossips could have their rumors. Emma had something far more precious, a family stitched together by choice rather than blood, strengthened by trial rather than ease, and bound by a love that had survived the coldest storm. The scarlet fever came with the January thaw, creeping through Willow Creek like a biblical plague. First the Baker children, then the schoolmaster's family, then house after house until Dr. Brennan was run ragged trying to tend them all. Emma first noticed Sarah's flushed cheeks during afternoon lessons. The child had been listless all morning, picking at her breakfast, but Emma attributed it to the gray weather. When Sarah swayed at her desk, Emma pressed a hand to her forehead and felt her heart stop. "James!" Her cry brought him running from his study. "Fetch the doctor, now!" One look at his daughter's fevered face sent James racing for his horse. Emma carried Sarah to bed, the child's skin burning through her nightgown. The telltale rash was already beginning to spread across her chest. Dr. Brennan's face was grim when he arrived. "It's scarlet fever, as I feared. Half the county's down with it. I've lost 3 children already this week." Emma's knees nearly buckled, but James's hand on her elbow steadied her. "What do we do?" "Keep her cool. Force fluids when you can. Watch for convulsions. Pray." The doctor left laudanum for the pain and promised to return when he could, but they all knew he had dozens of other patients needing care. Thus began 3 days of hell. Sarah's fever climbed relentlessly, despite cold compresses and every remedy Emma knew. The child thrashed in delirium, calling for her mother, crying out in pain as the rash spread angry and red across her small body. Emma never left the bedside. She bathed Sarah's burning skin, coaxed water between cracked lips, sang every lullaby she knew until her voice went hoarse. When Sarah's breathing grew labored, Emma propped her up, holding her for hours to ease the congestion. "You should rest," James urged on the second night. "Let Mrs. Chen take a turn." "No." Emma didn't even look up from Sarah's face. "I promised her I wouldn't leave. I keep my promises." James brought her food she didn't eat, tea that grew cold untouched. He took turns holding Sarah when Emma's arms grew numb. but she never went farther than the chair beside the bed. On the third night, the fever reached its crisis. Sarah's small body convulsed, back arching off the bed. Emma held her through it, tears streaming down her face as she whispered desperate prayers. "Please," she begged any deity that might be listening. "Take me instead. She's just a baby. She's already lost so much. Please." James knelt beside them, his own eyes wet. "Margaret," he whispered to the darkness, "if you have any influence up there, help her. Help our little girl." The hours crawled by. Sarah's breathing grew shallow, rattling in her chest. Dr. Brennan came near dawn, exhausted from tending the sick, and his expression told them what they already feared. "She's fighting, but she's weak. The next few hours will tell." Emma began to hum the same lullaby her own mother had sung, the one she'd hummed that first night James found them together. She rocked Sarah gently, pouring all her love, all her fierce determination into that simple melody. As the sun broke the horizon, painting the sick room in gentle gold, Sarah's breathing seemed to ease. The terrible heat began to recede, leaving her limp but alive in Emma's arms. "The fever's breaking." "Doctor," Brennan said in wonder. "I'll be damned, pardon me, but she's turned the corner." Emma finally allowed herself to sob. Great wrenching cries of relief. James wrapped his arms around both of them, his own shoulders shaking. They stayed that way as Sarah slept, her breathing deep and even for the first time in days. But their relief was short-lived. That evening, as James tried once again to convince Emma to rest, she swayed on her feet. He caught her as she fell, his hand finding her forehead burning hot. "No," he breathed. "Emma, no." She tried to smile through chattering teeth. "Just tired. Sarah needs you alive." He swept her into his arms, carrying her to the guest room next to Sarah's. "Mrs. Chen, send for the doctor." The fever hit Emma harder than it had Sarah, perhaps because she'd worn herself to nothing during her vigil. Within hours, she was delirious, tossing in the grip of nightmares, calling out for people long dead. James felt the world tilting off its axis. To lose Margaret had nearly destroyed him. To lose Emma now, when he'd only just begun to understand what she meant to him. He did for Emma what she'd done for Sarah, bathed her burning skin, forced water past her lips, held her through the convulsions. When she cried out for her mother, he gathered her close and whispered that she wasn't alone, would never be alone again. "Stay with me," he begged through the long nights. "Emma, please, I need you. Sarah needs you. We can't do this without you." In her few lucid moments, she worried about Sarah, trying to rise from bed. "I promised. Won't leave her. She's recovering. She asks for you constantly." James smoothed damp hair from her forehead. "You saved her. Emma, now let me save you." On the fourth day, when Dr. Brennan warned him to prepare for the worst, James did something he'd never done before. He sent everyone from the room, knelt beside Emma's bed, and spoke from his heart. "I know you can hear me, somewhere in there. I need you to know I love you, not as a servant, not as Sarah's caregiver, but as the woman who brought light back into our lives. I was a fool to fight it, to let society's rules matter more than what's real." He took her hand, feeling how small it was in his, how precious. "Marry me, Emma. Be my wife, Sarah's mother, not in secret or in shame, but proudly, before God and everyone. I don't give a damn what Victoria Ashford or the town gossips say. Just live. Please live." Whether it was his words, her own stubborn strength, or divine intervention, Emma's fever broke that night. She woke clear-eyed and weak, but undeniably alive, to find James asleep in the chair beside her bed, her hand still clasped in his. "James!" His eyes flew open, and the joy in them took her breath away. "Emma, thank God." "Sarah." is asking for you every 5 minutes. She's fine, thanks to you. His hand tightened on hers. Do you remember what I said during the fever? Color touched her pale cheeks. I thought I dreamed it. Not a dream. He shifted to sit on the bed's edge, cupping her face with gentle hands. I meant every word. Marry me, Emma. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are to us. Tears slipped down her cheeks. James, I'm nobody, no family, no dowry, no connections. You're everything, he interrupted fiercely. You're the woman who loved my daughter when I was too lost in grief to do it properly, who faced down society's scorn rather than abandon us, who nearly died saving Sarah's life. You're worth 1,000 Victoria Ashfords. The town can accept us or not, their choice. He leaned closer, resting his forehead against hers. All I care about is your answer. Will you have us? Emma, will you be my wife? Sarah's mother. From the doorway came a small voice. Say yes, Emma. Please say yes. They turned to find Sarah, still pale but standing on her own feet. Mrs. Chen hovering anxiously behind her. Emma held out her arms, and Sarah flew into them. How could I say anything else? She whispered, holding the child close. You've both owned my heart from the beginning. James wrapped his arms around them both, and for a long moment they simply held each other, a family forged in fire, tested by illness and prejudice, and proven stronger than any force that tried to break them apart. Outside, the January sun broke through the clouds, setting the ice-covered world ablaze with light. Spring would come, bringing new growth, new hope. And in the Morrison house, love had already bloomed, warm and sure and unshakable as the mountains themselves. The summons arrived on a cold February morning. Delivered by a nervous deputy who couldn't meet James's eyes, Victoria Ashford had made good on her threats, filing a formal complaint with the town council. Charges of improper influence and manipulation. James read aloud, his voice tight with anger. Seeking to have Miss Emma Hartley removed from the Morrison household and barred from contact with the minor child, Sarah Morrison. Emma's hands stilled on the bread she was kneading. She can do that. Her father's the judge. He has influence with the council. James crumpled the paper. The hearing is next week. Sarah, who'd been practicing her letters at the kitchen table, looked up with frightened eyes. They want to take Emma away. Over my dead body, James said grimly. But bravado couldn't change the reality. When they arrived at the town hall the following Tuesday, the courtroom was packed. It seemed every gossip in the county had come to witness the spectacle. Victoria sat in the front row, resplendent in black silk that made her look like a well-dressed vulture. Judge Ashford presided, his conflict of interest apparently irrelevant in a town where his word was law. This hearing will determine whether Miss Emma Hartley has exercised undue influence over the Morrison household, particularly regarding the minor child, Sarah Morrison. Victoria took the stand first, her testimony a masterwork of insinuation and half-truths. I witnessed firsthand how this person has insinuated herself into the family. The poor child calls her Mama, clearly confused about appropriate boundaries. And Mr. Morrison, well, it's obvious she's bewitched him for his money. I was there the night Mr. Morrison chose this servant over a proper match, she continued, dabbing at dry eyes. The girl was bold as brass, speaking out of turn, criticizing her betters. She's turned that household upside down with her schemes. Other witnesses followed townspeople who'd seen Emma shopping with Sarah, heard the child call her mother, noticed how James looked at his housemaid. Each testimony painted Emma as a calculating opportunist preying on a grieving family. Emma sat straight-backed through it all, hands folded, face composed despite the hurt each word inflicted. James reached for her hand under the table. Propriety be damned. Finally, Judge Ashford called Emma to testify. She rose gracefully, moving to the stand with quiet dignity. State your name and occupation. Emma Hartley. I work as housemaid for Mr. Morrison. Is it true you've encouraged the child to call you mother? No, sir. Sarah began calling me that on her own. I've tried to... A yes or no will suffice. Miss Hartley. The judge's tone was ice. Do you deny forming an inappropriate attachment to your employer? Emma lifted her chin. I deny manipulating anyone. I love Sarah because she's a wonderful child who needed affection. If that's inappropriate, then I'm guilty. And Mr. Morrison, do you deny pursuing him for his wealth? I pursue no one. Mr. Morrison is. That's enough. You may step down. The proceedings seemed hopeless until Mrs. Whitmore suddenly stood in the gallery. I'd like to testify, if it please the court. Judge Ashford frowned. This is highly irregular. So is a judge presiding over his own daughter's complaint. Mrs. Whitmore said tartly. Several people gasped at her audacity. I've held my tongue too long. Watching this farce, I'll speak now. Or I'll speak to everyone who'll listen about what really goes on in the Morrison house. Forced to allow it. The judge watched sourly as the stern housekeeper took the stand. I didn't like Emma Hartley when she arrived. Mrs. Whitmore began. Too young, too pretty, too familiar with her betters. I watched her like a hawk, waiting for her to prove herself the schemer I suspected. Emma's heart sank, but Mrs. Whitmore continued. Instead, I watched her work 18-hour days without complaint. Watched her comfort a grieving child when the rest of us didn't know how. Watched her bring laughter back to a house that had become a tomb. The housekeeper's voice strengthened. That girl saved Sarah Morrison's life, sitting by her bed for 3 days straight during the scarlet fever, then took sick herself from exhaustion. If that's manipulation, then I'll eat my best Sunday hat. Dr. Brennan stood next. I'll testify as well. I've seen Miss Hartley's devotion firsthand. No amount of money could buy what she's given that family pure, selfless love. One by one, others rose, Mrs. Chen spoke of Emma's kindness. Ranch hands testified to her hard work. Even Mrs. Blackwood, the worst gossip in town, admitted she'd been wrong about the girl. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Sarah Morrison stood up, small and determined. Your Honor, James started. She's just a child. Which is why she should be heard, Sarah said clearly. Since everyone's deciding my future without asking me. Judge Ashford couldn't refuse without looking worse than he already did. Very well, but keep it brief. Child. Sarah walked to the front, a letter clutched in her hand. I wrote this myself. Emma taught me how... She unfolded the paper with careful hands and began to read. Dear Judge Ashford, my name is Sarah Morrison. I am 7 years old. My mama died when I was 5. It hurt so bad I thought I would die too. Then Emma came. Her voice wavered but didn't break. Emma doesn't want Papa's money. I know because she tried to leave once when the mean people talked about her. She stayed because I begged her to. She stayed because she loves me. Sarah looked up from her letter, meeting Victoria's eyes. Miss Ashford says Emma confused me about boundaries. But I'm not confused. I know Emma isn't my real mama. My real mama is in heaven, but Emma is the mama of my heart, the one who stays when I'm scared, who teaches me to be brave, who loves me even when I'm naughty. She turned to the judge. I already lost one mama. Please don't take away the one God sent to replace her. If you make Emma leave, you might as well send me away too, because I won't stay where she's not wanted. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of several women quietly crying. James stood and moved to his daughter's side. Your Honor, I'd like to address this court not as a defendant, but as a father and a man who's learned something about real worth. Judge Ashford's jaw tightened, but he nodded. My wife, Margaret, was everything society values well-born. Educated, refined. I loved her deeply and mourned her loss. When she died, I ran from that grief. abandoning my daughter to servants while I hid in work and distance. James's voice strengthened. Emma Hartley has none of society's advantages. No family name, no dowry, no connections. What she has is a heart big enough to love a broken child and a fool of a man who nearly threw away happiness because it came in an unexpected package. He turned to face Victoria directly. You speak of gold digging and manipulation, but Emma gained nothing from loving us except hard work, social censure, and nearly dying of the same fever that almost took Sarah. A gold digger would have fled at the first hardship. A schemer would have demanded more than the privilege of saving my daughter's life. Finally, he addressed the judge. You can rule against us. You can force Emma from our home, but you should know that if she goes, we go with her. I'll sell the ranch and start over somewhere people judge hearts instead of pedigrees. Because Emma Hartley isn't just our housemaid, she's our family. And if this town can't accept that, then it's this town we'll leave behind. The silence stretched taut as a violin string. Judge Ashford's face had gone from red to purple to pale. He looked at his daughter, saw the ugly twist of her beautiful features, the spite that had driven this vendetta. Case dismissed, he said heavily. The court finds no evidence of improper influence or manipulation. Miss Hartley is free to remain in whatever capacity the Morrison family desires. The courtroom erupted. Victoria shrieked in outrage, but her voice was drowned by cheers and applause. Sarah threw herself into Emma's arms while James wrapped them both in his embrace. It's over, he murmured against Emma's hair. We won. No, Emma corrected, tears streaming down her face as she held the two people she'd loved most in the world. We just began. As they left the courthouse, the crowd parted respectfully. Some still whispered, but many nodded or smiled. Mrs. Blackwood even pressed Emma's hand, murmuring an apology. Victoria Ashford stood alone on the courthouse steps, her schemes in ruins, watching the family she'd tried to destroy walk away together. In her pursuit of position and propriety, she'd revealed the ugliness of her own heart, and in trying to tear them apart, she'd only bound them closer together. The Morrison family, for that's what they were now, in heart if not yet in law, climbed into their wagon and headed home. Behind them, the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, a promise of brighter days ahead. Spring arrived in Wyoming with a burst of wildflowers that painted the prairie in purple, yellow, and white. The Morrison ranch buzzed with preparation for the wedding that had become the most anticipated event in Willow Creek's recent history. Emma stood before the mirror in what had been Margaret's room, now hers, while Mrs. Chen carefully buttoned the wedding dress. It wasn't new they'd found it in a trunk, wrapped in tissue. Margaret's own wedding gown lovingly preserved. Mr. James wanted you to have it. Mrs. Whitmore said, her usual stern demeanor softened by emotion. Said Margaret would have wanted it too. The ivory silk had yellowed slightly with age, but it fit as if tailored for Emma, the delicate lace overlay catching the morning light. Sarah danced around them in her own white dress, scattered with embroidered forget-me-nots. You look like a princess, Emma, the most beautiful princess in the whole world. Emma caught the child's hands, stilling her long enough to straighten her ribbon. And you look like an angel. Your mama would be so proud. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, ranchers and their families, townspeople who'd witnessed the trial and chosen love over prejudice. Even Mrs. Blackwood was there, having become one of Emma's most unlikely defenders after the hearing. The ceremony would be held in the meadow where Emma had taught Sarah to make flower crowns, where they'd picnicked during those first tentative months, where the spring flowers now created a natural cathedral. James waited at the makeshift altar, more nervous than he'd been negotiating with cattle barons. His foreman, Tom Bradley, stood as his best man, trying not to grin at his boss's fidgeting. She'll come, Tom said quietly. That woman would walk through fire for you and Sarah. I know. James straightened his string tie for the 10th time. That's what terrifies me. What if I'm not enough? What if... The music started Mrs. Chen's nephew on the fiddle, playing a hymn that floated across the meadow like birdsong. The guests rose, turning toward the house. First came Sarah, scattering rose petals with great concentration, her tongue poking out slightly. The crowd chuckled fondly at her seriousness. Then Emma appeared, and James forgot how to breathe. She walked alone, no father to give her away, no family to stand with her. But her head was high, her smile radiant, and in her eyes was a love so profound it made his chest ache. The woman who'd arrived at his door a year ago as a desperate orphan now walked toward him as his chosen bride, his daughter's savior, his heart's home. When she reached him, he couldn't help himself. Protocol be damned. He cupped her face in his hands and whispered, "You're here." "Where else would I be?" she whispered back. "You're my family. You and Sarah are my whole world." Reverend Patterson cleared his throat, smiling. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but the emotion behind them transformed the familiar phrases into sacred vows. When James promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice broke slightly. When Emma pledged to stand by him in sickness and health, tears slipped down her cheeks. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the Reverend asked. "I do," Sarah piped up, unprompted. "She's my Emma, and I give her to Papa, but only if I can keep her too." Laughter rippled through the gathering. The Reverend, grandfather to 6, didn't miss a beat. "I think that can be arranged, young lady." When it came time for the rings, James slipped a simple gold band onto Emma's finger. "This was my mother's," he murmured. "She would have loved you." Emma's ring for him was new, purchased with her carefully saved wages. Inside, she'd had engraved, "Forever your family, E and S. By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before God and community. But what moved the witnesses most was what happened after Sarah launching herself at them both, the three of them embracing as the meadow erupted in cheers. The reception was held in the barn, transformed with wildflowers and lanterns. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors, proof that the community had not just accepted but embraced this unconventional family. Emma had worried about the dancing, never having learned the formal steps. But James just held her close, swaying to the fiddle music. "I don't need fancy steps," he murmured in her ear. "I just need you." As the sun set, painting the sky in the shades of rose and gold, Sarah fell asleep in Emma's lap, worn out from dancing with every ranch hand who'd indulge her. Emma stroked the child's hair, marveling at how much had changed. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "How I came here with nothing but hope and a carpet bag. How I thought I'd be lucky just to have a roof over my head and honest work." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "I never dreamed I'd find a home, a daughter, a love like this." "You didn't find it," James corrected gently. "You created it. With your courage, your compassion, your refusal to let propriety matter more than love." Old Sam, the eldest ranch hand, raised his glass in a toast to the new Mrs. Morrison, who proved that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born to. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Even Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her eyes, though she'd deny it later. As the evening wound down, Victoria Ashford's carriage passed by on the road, heading for the train station. She was leaving for San Francisco, the humiliation of her failed scheme too much to bear. Through the barn's open doors, she could see the celebration, the happiness she'd tried to destroy, now shining brighter than ever. But inside the barn, no one noticed her passing. They were too busy celebrating a love that had survived drought and fever, prejudice and spite, a love that had transformed a motherless child, a grieving widower, and the orphaned servant into something beautiful, a family. Later, as James carried sleeping Sarah to the house with Emma beside him, he paused at the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison." Emma smiled, that sunrise smile that had first caught his heart. "I've been home since the day I arrived. It just took us a while to realize it." They entered together. The house that had once echoed with loneliness, now filled with the warmth of love requited and promises kept. Behind them, the last lanterns flickered out in the barn, but ahead, every window of their home glowed with light. The Morrison Ranch had seen its share of sorrow, but now it stood testament to a different truth, that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, that families could be forged from choice rather than chance, and that sometimes the greatest treasures came disguised as simple housemaids carrying nothing but carpetbags and hope. As spring gave way to summer, the ranch thrived. Emma proved as capable a rancher's wife as she'd been a housemaid, working alongside James, teaching Sarah not just letters but life. And if the occasional whisper still followed them to town, it was drowned out by the laughter of a child who had two parents again, the contentment of a man who'd found love where he least expected it, and the quiet joy of a woman who discovered that home wasn't a place, but the people who loved you. The Wild West had taken everything from Emma Hartley, her parents, her childhood, her chances at an easy life. But it had given her something precious in return, a love strong enough to weather any storm, a daughter who chose her, and a future bright with promise. In the end, the orphan girl who'd arrived seeking work had found so much more. She'd found her forever family. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Emma and James's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all odds in the frontier, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts. Did Emma's courage inspire you? Could you feel the dust of Wyoming and the warmth of that little family finding each other? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.